The final night of 2009 was supposed to be filled with celebration, fireworks, and family warmth. But for Sheila Danvi, a respected Wall Street banker and mother of two, it became the night of silence and shadows. Her luxury apartment on Upper West Side was a place of elegance and comfort, yet that morning it was transformed into a scene of horror. It was Anna, her 9-year-old daughter, who stumbled upon the nightmare. The girl tiptoed into the bathroom, expecting to find her mother getting ready. Instead, she froze. Her mother's body floated face down in the bathtub. The once clear water was now clouded with blood. Above the tub, the cabinet door had been torn from its hinges, dangling at a strange angle as if ripped apart by violence. Anna screamed. Shaking, she fled the bathroom and grabbed the phone, her small fingers barely managing to dial her father, Rod. All she could say, between sobs, was that something terrible had happened to her mother. Within minutes, Rod burst into the apartment. He rushed to the bathroom, dragged Sheila's cold body out of the tub, and covered her with a blanket. Following the frantic instructions of the 911 operator, he pressed his hands to her chest, trying to force life back into her. But Sheila's body was already stiff, the skin pale, the warmth gone. When the paramedics arrived, the verdict was immediate and merciless. Sheila Danvi was gone. The police scanned the room, their eyes falling on the broken cabinet door, the blood, the water. The conclusion seemed simple. Sheila must have slipped, struck her head, and drowned. No signs of forced entry. No valuables. Missing. Nothing that screamed murder. The case was swiftly closed. An accident, they said. A tragic fall in the bathroom. But for those who knew Sheila, her friends, her colleagues, her family, none of it made sense. She was too cautious, too meticulous. She never bathed in tubs. She always preferred showers. And just the day before, she had undergone a keratin hair treatment, something that required her to keep her hair dry for at least 3 days. Why, then, would she submerge herself in a bathtub full of water? The questions whispered louder than the official answers, and soon doubt began to consume those who loved her most. Sheila's funeral was heavy with grief, but beneath the mourning ran an undercurrent of suspicion. Her family, struggling against disbelief, began to voice what none of them wanted to admit. This was not an accident, and when, 6 months later, her body was exhumed, the truth clawed its way to the surface. The autopsy revealed something the police had ignored. Sheila had not drowned. She had been strangled, her hyoid bone fractured, her ribs broken in the desperate struggle for life. The bruises on her arms, the burst vessels in her eyes, every mark screamed of violence. She had been murdered, and the person responsible was someone she knew, someone close, someone who had the most to gain from her death. The city that never sleeps was about to awaken to a dark, twisted story of betrayal, greed, and a husband whose love had curdled into something far more sinister. The revelation that Sheila Danvi had been murdered changed everything. Suddenly, the picture of a tragic accident became a chilling puzzle. The whispers at her funeral grew into open suspicion, and at the center of it all stood her husband, Rod. Covey L. Rod was once a rising name in the world of professional backgammoner, sharp mind, quick with numbers and strategy. But as his wife climbed the ranks of Wall Street, earning prestige and wealth, Rod's own career began to falter. Friends whispered that the balance of power in their marriage had shifted. Sheila was thriving, while Rod seemed to be shrinking. In her shadow by 2009, their relationship had deteriorated into bitterness and fights. They had separated, though not yet divorced, and were locked in a vicious custody battle over their 2 children. Sheila wanted full custody. Rod, unwilling to give up control, fought her at every step. But the most dangerous battle was over Sheila's money. She was worth millions. Her success as a banker had secured her children's future, and that future did not include Rod. In fact, Sheila had made it clear she was about to cut him out completely. She had scheduled a meeting with her lawyer the very next day, December 31st, 2009, to officially remove him from her will. If Sheila lived just one more day, Rod would lose everything. Detectives soon learned about the broken marriage, the looming changes in Sheila's will, and the bitter custody fight. The picture began to shift. What had looked like an accident now looked like a crime with motive, opportunity, and a man who had everything to gain. But suspicion wasn't enough. There were no fingerprints, no witnesses, and no security footage that placed Rod inside the apartment that night. He denied being anywhere near her, insisting he had nothing to do with her death. Still, whispers about him grew louder. Sheila's parents, devastated and furious, were convinced. They began to push for justice, refusing to let their daughter's case disappear into silence. But as the investigation deepened, another disturbing detail came to light. Rod had not just been fighting with Sheila, he had also been living a double life. While battling her for custody, he had moved in with another woman, creating an unstable, volatile home. His finances were crumbling, his reputation unraveling, and yet, he always seemed to be plotting, calculating his next move, like a backgammon player, staring down a final roll of the dice. And if Sheila was out of the way, his future, suddenly, looked a lot brighter. The police began to piece together a chilling theory. Rod hadn't just stumbled into anger. He had planned this, carefully, coldly, and the timing just hours before Sheila could legally erase him from her. Fortune was too precise to ignore. The walls were beginning to close in. But Rod, clever and manipulative, still believed he could stay one step ahead. And for a while, he did. By early 2010, the case against Rod Kovlin was growing in whispers and speculation. But the law demanded proof, and proof was still elusive. The medical examiner's report had shifted Sheila's cause of death from an accident to a homicide. But without physical evidence linking Rod, the case stalled. Rod, however, wasn't content to simply sit back and wait. He was unraveling. His gambling debts mounted, his career in professional backgammon was nearly dead, and his life with his new girlfriend was crumbling under the weight of financial chaos. Those who knew him said he was becoming more volatile, unpredictable, dangerous, and yet, what made him truly terrifying wasn't his instability. It was his cunning. Detectives began to suspect that Rod hadn't just acted out of rage on the night Sheila died. He had been plotting her downfall long before that. He had allegedly tried to poison her earlier in their marriage, slipping harmful substances into her food and drink. At one point, Sheila confided to friends that she believed Rod was trying to kill her. But Sheila, strong and determined, had always fought back. Until that final night, after Sheila's death, Rod's behavior only fueled suspicion. Instead of mourning, he seemed focused on money. He made attempts to gain control over her estate and her life insurance, showing little emotion over the loss of his wife. Even worse, he allegedly tried to manipulate his own children into helping him cover his tracks. The most chilling detail emerged when investigators learned that Rod had asked his daughter to find something in Sheila's apartment, a subtle attempt to enlist her in tampering with evidence. It revealed just how far he was willing to go to protect himself, even if it meant dragging his children into the shadows of his crime. Still, without direct evidence, Rod walked free. The years began to stretch on, and Sheila's family feared justice might never come. But Rod's arrogance was his greatest weakness. He thought he was untouchable, that the law could never catch up to him. What he didn't know was that every reckless decision, every whispered manipulation, every desperate scheme was slowly building the noose that would one day tighten round his neck. And soon, the cracks in his carefully constructed facade would begin to show. By 2011, Rod Kovlin's life was collapsing in every possible way. His finances were in ruins. His gambling had drained whatever money he managed to get his hands on, and his relationships were fractured beyond repair. His new girlfriend had left him, disgusted by his lies and manipulations. Even those who once defended him were beginning to whisper about his temper, his recklessness, and the possibility that he had killed Sheila. Still, Rod held on to one obsession above all else: money. He couldn't let go of the fact that Sheila had been wealthy, successful, and independent, and that with her death, so much of her fortune and her estate was slipping away from him. But Rod wasn't done scheming. Investigators uncovered shocking evidence that he had been plotting even darker crimes after Sheila's death. Among his chilling plans was an attempt to kill his own parents in hopes of inheriting their money. He even considered murdering his daughter, who had begun resisting his influence, fearing she might expose him. The sheer coldness of these ideas horrified everyone who heard them. They painted a picture of a man whose greed and ego had consumed him to the point where even blood ties meant nothing. And yet, despite the mounting suspicions, years passed. No arrest, no trial, no justice. Rod was careful enough to avoid leaving behind hard evidence, and without it, prosecutors were left with a case built on circumstantial details, whispers, and theories. But the walls were closing in. Every reckless decision, every dark fantasy he shared with acquaintances, every outburst in public, they were all being noted, documented, and filed away. Rod might have believed he was outsmarting the system, but in reality, he was digging himself deeper into a hole. Sheila's family never stopped pushing for answers. They refused to let her memory fade into silence. Behind closed doors, investigators were piecing together a timeline, reconstructing Rod's actions, and quietly preparing for the day when they would finally have enough to bring him down. And, while Rod descended further into desperation, convinced he was untouchable, the truth was simple. His time was running out. By 2015, the whispers surrounding Rod Kovlin had become impossible to ignore. His behavior was unraveling in public. His children were terrified of him. And even those who once tolerated his arrogance now saw him for what he truly was: a man consumed by greed, rage, and delusion. Rod's daughter, Anna, had begun to confide in others about the things her father told her in secret. She revealed that Rod pressured her to lie, to accuse her grandfather of harming Sheila, and to manipulate the narrative in his favor. At first, people thought these were just the confused words of a child caught between parents. But soon, the chilling consistency of her accounts made it clear Rod had been trying to twist her into a weapon, using his own daughter to shield himself from suspicion. The facade he had worked so hard to maintain was collapsing. His paranoia grew unbearable. Friends recalled how he would ramble about conspiracies, about how everyone was against him, and about how Sheila's family had orchestrated a vendetta to destroy his life. He couldn't understand why his schemes weren't working anymore. why he was running out of people to manipulate. But investigators were finally closing in. Years of painstaking work, years of watching him, collecting evidence, and building a case were beginning to bear fruit. In December 2015, nearly 6 years after Sheila's death, Rod was arrested. The charges, second-degree murder, the news, shook the community. Some felt relief finally, after so long, justice might be possible. Others felt horror, realizing that for years a suspected killer had walked free, plotting new crimes, manipulating children, and tormenting his own family. As Rod was taken into custody, his arrogance still flickered. He believed he could outtalk prosecutors, outwit the system, and sway a jury with his charm. He had done it before, hadn't he? But what Rod didn't know was that the evidence gathered against him was stronger than he ever imagined. The prosecution was prepared, Sheila's family was determined, and the truth was about to unravel in a courtroom for the world to see. The stage was set. After years of waiting, the trial of Rod Kovlin was about to begin. The trial of Rod Kovlin began in 2019, and the courtroom was thick with tension. Family, friends, and media packed the gallery, all drawn by the shocking story of a mother brutally killed, and a man so consumed by greed that he would manipulate his own children. From the start, the prosecution painted a chilling portrait of Rod, a man who viewed Sheila not as a wife or mother, but as a gateway to wealth. His life insurance policy, the planned exclusion from the will, and his constant threats against the family all pointed toward premeditation. Witnesses were brought forward one by one. Former lovers of Rod recounted the confession he had made to them about the murder, revealing a disturbing level of calculated cruelty. The nanny testified about Rod's abusive behavior, the intimidation he imposed on his children, and the relentless pressure he applied to Anna to manipulate her own grandfather. Each account added layers of evidence that circled closer and closer around him. Despite the lack of direct physical evidence, the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. Sheila's ex-husband had had access, motive, and knowledge of a chokehold, the very method used to end her life. The testimony of the mistress, combined with the accounts of the children and other witnesses, constructed a damning narrative that even the defense struggled to refute. Rod, once confident in his ability to evade justice, now sat silently as the walls of his carefully constructed life crumbled. The jury deliberated, fully aware of the weight of the decision before them. They had heard about Rod's relentless pursuit of Sheila's wealth, his abuse, his manipulation of the children, and the chilling indifference he had shown to the trauma he inflicted. After hours of deliberation, the verdict was delivered. Guilty. Guilty of the murder of his wife, Sheila Danvi. The courtroom erupted in a mix of relief, sobs, and stunned silence. Rod Kovlin was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 25 years. The sentence was a small consolation to Sheila's family, but it brought a sense of closure to the horrific chapter that had haunted them for nearly a decade. Sheila's children, though forever scarred by the loss of their mother and the betrayal of their father, were finally safe from his manipulation. Custody remained with Sheila's parents, who promised to protect the children and honor Sheila's memory today. Rod serves his sentence at the Attica Correctional Institution in New York, a stark reminder that actions driven by greed and malice eventually meet justice. Sheila Danvi is remembered not for the violent end she suffered, but for the life she lived, intelligent, accomplished, loving, and dedicated to her children. Her story serves as a grim warning about the dangers of domestic abuse, greed, and manipulation, and the enduring importance of justice, no matter how long it takes.